develop who am I? And it's in that we start to form identities. And the identities are not just mental constructs. They're also emotional aspects, even instinctual aspects. I see, the energy that you talk about, I think energy is driven.
Hi, my name is Yana. Thank you for watching. This episode starts with an audio introduction and continues with the video content. So remember to watch it until the end. And subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, share with friends. Thank you for being here and listening to timeless teachings.
What is the difference between feminine and masculine journey into spirituality and self-realization? Is there a difference at all? Are you here to transcend or to dissolve? Or maybe both? Our guest today will help us to understand the essence of the feminine way, what are the main female archetypes, and how they can help us to connect deeper with our true nature. How feminine and masculine become non-gender focused, and why the world is in such an urgent need of psycho-spiritual guides. Jutka Freiman has been guiding women on the journey from self to soul since the mid-80s. A psychotherapist and group facilitator with degrees in psychology and anthropology. She is also an expert in the field of archetypal psychology, psychodrama, Gestalt, art therapy, and the Enneagram. Ready to dive deep? Make yourself comfortable, and let's begin.
Jutka, thank you for joining us here today. It is a pleasure to have you as a guest on the interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And I know we have people we know in common, you could say common friends, that all speak very highly of you, diving really deep into spirituality for women and joining for women. And I feel that would be a wonderful way for us to start our interview today. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit about your own story. Let's start with that, right? So that why did you get into what you are doing right now?
It is relevant, actually. Yeah. It is. And part of my initial journey would have to be that I grew up with my father and not my mother. Mm-hmm. So I had no sisters, no aunties, my grandmother was around for a little bit, but I basically grew up with my father and I as the only relatives in the Southern Hemisphere. So, I was born in Europe and we came to Australia when I was very young. So we didn't have the benefit of an extended family. And although my father loved the feminine, which he did, and maybe a little too much, many, many wives, I was longing for this kind of home base. I was longing for a place to land in what I understood was my own feminine. And so I suppose, it's from, healer, heal thyself. When I became a therapist, I wanted to work with women. I felt like I had a particular longing from my own story that was so deep and profound. And I wanted to be with women. I wanted to learn about women. So I started studying a lot about the sacred feminine, the archetypal feminine, the feminine psychology of Jung, and myths and stories, and that's kind of was my passion and what I now understand as the bit that was missing in my own experience. So I remember, years ago, I did a program with Jean Houston, who's a wonderful archetypal psychologist from America. And I went up to German and I said to her, look, I work with women and I work in the feminine and I feel like I'm teaching women, and yet I don't come from a family where I've, had this kind of influence. And she said, oh, well, then it's great that you're doing this, because she said it's often the exile that has the longing and the hunger to belong to this thing that will actually go the extra mile. People that have had it all around them all their lives can get a bit complacent about it. But I think that's what fueled my journey.
That is so beautifully said and so true. And, I believe also one of my teachers, Blair Singer, used to say once that we always teach what we want to learn fundamentally. So it's exactly what you say, right? That the longing for something that you didn't have and now led you on that journey that you have been for many years studying and understanding and discovering and embodying that feminine, right? And so here, if we talk about, let's say, call it spirituality or personal development, or maybe psychology for women or realization, whatever word we choose for that, what would you feel the difference between journey of a man and journey of a woman who decides to go on this path?
Right. Yeah. And it is different. So I kind of, I feel like things have changed since I first began understanding this or experiencing this. And I feel that now, we've evolved into a place where we can take gender away from it and we can start to look at it in its more pure form. And I think this is an evolution, that we start to talk about the yin and the feminine in all people, and the yang and the masculine, again, in all people, without the tight gender constructs that we once had. Having said that, I still want to acknowledge that many of us came from a particular conditioning, that if you were born a woman in a woman's body and identify as a woman, there was a particular kind of conditioning that we have to work through in order to know the not so good side of the feminine and the higher aspects or the more wholesome aspects of the feminine, and similarly for men. But I just wanted to say that I think things are on the move, and I think I'm certainly revisiting a lot of things that were more gender constructs in my head and my experience. So I want to put that out there. But I think the difference between the journey of the yin and the journey of the yang.
Yes, let's remove the gender. That's what I mean. Yeah, let's remove the gender, because it's also more in tune with where the modern world is right now.
Yeah.
And
right.
So doesn't matter whether it's male or female body, yin and yang, right? Masculine and feminine as the energy.
Right. Okay. So the yang journey, and this is, Jung was talking about this, and we can see this cross-culturally in Archetypes, was a transcendent function. And it's kind of a linear, rational, a kind of management of the mind into its purest form. We get mindfulness from this. And it is a sense of being up and joined, So we can look at many of the ancient ways in which we honor deities, and, we'll see the obelisk, and, we'll see the tower, and, lots of things that were, reaching into the heavens for this place of high spiritual enlightenment. And it was kind of still, and it was solitary and monastic in nature and sedentary. And then we go probably more to indigenous culture to find where the feminine is most pure historically. And we start to look at the relational component. So we call the masculine the active, and we call the feminine the receptive. But the feminine is dynamic, and our best teacher of the feminine is earth and nature, all of which is feminine. But in turn, inside of us, our soul, which is also feminine. And so, this exists in all human beings. You don't have to be a woman to do this, but the path requires a sort of more a dispersion of energy in a conscious way, not a sort of scattering but a dispersion of energy along a more horizontal axis. I mean, it certainly has a depth, but it's kind of, we widen back and it's more inclusive, and there's a place of no separation. So we don't seek to move beyond. We seek to broaden the body into a place of dissolving through devotion as opposed to service. So, it's kind of an expanded energy.
This is so beautiful.
The one as an inclusion. Everything is welcome and embraced and held. And so the path would have it be more dynamic and fluid, more engaged with flow, with being, and more engaged also with receptivity.
That reminds me also what people call the yogic or the tantric path. So what you are sharing, right? It's a bit of a similarity, I think, when we talk maybe left and right brain, if we want to go there. So maybe not that much, but yogic and tantric paths for sure, where like the yogic culture itself also historically has been more masculine. It's what you said, right? It's about the discipline. It's about transcendence. It's a step-by-step process also, which is clearly outlined. And then, if you follow step-by-step process, then you will have the result, because many people before you had it. So, and then that's probably more yang type of energy. And then the yin energy, it's more the tantric path. And that's what they say, that it's all about the dissolution and acceptance, what it is and what is happening around. And I'm not expressing my opinion here, but I did hear from many mystical schools that all masculine ways eventually dissolve into the feminine. So yoga eventually dissolves into Tantra. And that's also what I heard from many like monks or lamas or yogis who are doing it as the entire life journey, that you always start with this discipline and kind of yogic approach. And then when you do this long enough, then you eventually inevitably end up being in this tantric space where there's this allowance for everything.
Yes.
So that's exactly, I feel, what you were saying, which is very beautiful.
Yes, and I think, I agree with you. And in that allowing, and, I know in Tantra, the polarity, is merged, but it is a clear polarity of yin and yang. And then there's a coming together. And I think part of the feminine path is not to hold on to the polarity. And maybe this is exactly the evolution that we are experiencing currently. It's not to make those distinctions and hold them tight, but rather make those distinctions and bring them together. And I think, even the alchemists of old would talk to us about the sacred marriage, and to understand and to experience these two energies within us all is definitely a high spiritual practice. And then to be able to marry them is Tantra, the intra-Tantra path, I think.
Yes, absolutely. That's, since we're on a Tantra topic, highly controversial in the common world and also largely misunderstood. Yes. But yes, that's the essence, where we always start with creating union within ourselves first, before we can make this attempt to connect with someone else while staying in our totality, right? Without having those lost pieces that then we have to pick up later.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes it's good to talk about what the feminine isn't, to get a clearer understanding.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, there is so much that gets misinterpreted in our current state. And the feminine can be hijacked, just like the masculine, by ego. So when we talk about the feminine, we're not talking about an egoic feminine, which is usually quite strategic and trying to get something and using feminine charm or seduction or, accommodation, or, it's using attributes of the feminine in order to get whatever it wants, So in the same way as you see that, you say that the tantric path is not well understood and is quite controversial. I think that the feminine path is also not particularly well understood, because I think that we can get all dressed up and we can gyrate and we can learn how to sigh and we can look like we're really in a no preference practice, but it's all about compensation. So we have to be really careful at the beginning of any spiritual journey to get clear on what does my ego want from this and how might my ego interfere with this journey. I can wear all the right things and form a new spiritual identity and really not have integrated any of it.
That's a very important word, right, that you just said, identity. So let's talk about that a little bit. That also what people call the spiritual ego, right? So we have the materialistic ego, which all of us have, especially, all of us, those who were born and raised in the society, which most of people are in the world right now. So then we all have this materialistic ego, which is everything around us. And then we form those identities in the material world with whatever roles we have been playing historically, whether it is a man or a woman. Yeah. And then people go, okay, I don't want to have it anymore. Now I'm going to go on the path of enlightenment. And that's what he said. Different clothes, different, maybe different living circumstances, different country, different surroundings, practices, right? Like, okay, I'm reciting mantra, I'm doing yoga every day, so I must be doing something great. And it's a very, very tricky one. And I remember listening to Sadhguru, one of his satsangs, and I really love what he said, which is very, very beautiful. That he was saying in a spiritual process, there are two major ways how you could see whether you're progressing or not. So one way is you monitor your mind. It's a mental progress, right? So when your mind becomes like more and more liberated. However, this is a very tricky one because mind is very tricky and it could fool you until the rest of your, until literally the end of your life. You might be thinking that you are realizing something only to realize later that it was all a joke and the mind just tricked you. So mental realization is really hard to know whether it is pure or not. Yes. And that's why, like historically, right? So there were teachers and gurus, and this is like an entire different conversations because I know people are polarized about it. Some go, yes, let's have a teacher. Others like, no, you are your own guru. Don't listen to anyone. So different people have different opinions. But the other way is the energy. So either mind or energy, right? So, and energy is something tangible. Energy is something you can feel, we can even like scientifically measure energy within our body. And I think this is the studies that have been done, like with people who have been meditating for a really long time. They check their physicality and physiology, what is happening within them. And so on the energy level, then there is this transformation.
Yes.
So
absolutely. And I would, I think that as we break that down a bit about what is the energy, because I think a lot of our practices come from the East. And the difference for us in the West is that, we have a much stronger ego. We polish our ego in a way that perhaps they didn't. They may now, but they didn't traditionally when these, practices were formed. But we have a very strong individual ego. They had probably more a social ego, but we have a very strong individual ego. In fact, we all kind of try to individuate, so we try to separate out from our family and, our community, and we try and develop who am I. And it's in that we start to form identities. And the identities are not just mental constructs. They're also emotional aspects, even instinctual aspects. I see, the energy that you talk about. I think energy is driven instinctually, it can be driven emotionally, it can be driven mentally. And the ego has their own sort of set of energies, right? So I know that we talk about quietening the mind, but we don't talk so much about quietening the heart.
This is a good one.
And I think that that's important. If we, in spiritual practice, we've sort of almost left the emotional realm to psychology and sort of said, oh, well, it doesn't really enter into spiritual development, but I think it does. And I think that when we talk about qualities like equanimity, you know, that capacity for us to be almost oceanic in our emotionality, so that we can roll with the waves. You know, Leonard Cohen had a beautiful saying, and he said, if you don't see yourself as part of the ocean, you're going to get awfully seasick. And
That's a very good one.
You know, and you know, with the development of this idea of EQ, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, we have a tendency now to believe the emotions that we have. We're hip and groovy with not believing what our mind says, but we're still coming to terms with not believing what our emotions are telling us. And if the emotions are coming from the egoic aspect of us, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute, they are also not to be believed. You know, there is also a practice where we just settle them. And it's not that we ignore them, because everything is welcome, but we broaden back and view them from the perspective of the witness and notice what they're telling us about what needs to be relaxed in the ego. And there's no point, I don't think, in jumping over the top of them and pretending they're not there. I mean, I'm all for pattern interrupt. I think it's a great thing. But I think to really integrate, we need to disidentify with the emotional world that we have so long taken as who we are. And so I know that there are some people that are given more to the mental, you know, egoic thinking that isn't helpful, but some of us are very given to the emotionality of our identity, and our work is there. So we can silence the mind, but in order to do that, we've got to jump over the emotion rather than integrate the emotion. And I think we need to integrate the emotion.
Wow. What is the example? The example that's important so people understand that is the difference, right?
So, I mean, I can, you know, this is not a word I love, triggered. I can get tender around something that a friend of mine does. You know, I've got a pretty alive abandonment wound, and if a friend of mine doesn't ring me when something big is happening in my life, I can feel the hurt of that in a way which part of which might be a bit of a longing for contact, and part of which might push into an early abandonment history that I have, which is mine to repair, not to languish in, right? I don't need to forever be pulling off the scar tissue of that, but I do need to examine it and know that it's mine. So I have a predisposition to being tender around people not showing up. That's mine. Now, when I feel that hurt, am I to believe that the volume of that hurt is relevant to the current situation? Well, if I believe that if I feel it, it must be true, I will think that that's how hurt I got because they didn't show up. But hopefully I can widen back and I can acknowledge that actually, no, some of this belongs to my old story, which I need to do some repair around. Whatever got triggered in me, whatever little part got triggered in me around that old story, I need to attend to and I need to settle. And then whatever belongs to the current scenario can belong there, But I can usually breathe through that and find a need. The minute I find my need in that situation, which is maybe to talk to my friend or ring my friend, I can make a repair. But to indulge the drama of that situation because I believe everything I feel isn't very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's quite a few things that I can do to empower myself, to soothe myself, and to relax the emotional field so that I can come back to a bigger self.
Yeah, yeah.
So I often see it as though, all of us have got scars from when we were little. All of us. Things happened, it hurt, they're there. So we all have these tender parts of us. And I feel like those are going to be our Achilles heel, and we will heal them. But the spiritual aspect of that is to grow myself wider and bigger and to welcome that scar, which when I'm bigger reduces in size in relation to who I am. If I'm really narrow and tight, that scar is maybe 30% of me. But when I broaden back, widen out, and welcome it with loving arms, I'm much bigger. And that scar may not even change that much in size, but I do. And who is the I that is? That is the part that is me, that is beyond this little me. So I feel that's kind of a bit more of a feminine way of approaching spirituality, is to know this larger self.
You mentioned earlier about the archetypes.
Yes.
Right? So that you were doing some joining into the female archetypes.
Yes.
What is the best take from that journey?
What is the what?
The best realization, or like the best take, something that you can share with us.
Yes.
That will help other women perhaps to understand better where they are in life and how relevant it is. Because I know archetypes are very powerful.
Yes, yes. Well, I think the first thing to say about archetypes is that, again, to distinguish them from stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
So stereotypes fit the culture. They're more culture specific. They come and go. They're the energy that gets wrapped around a particular cultural story. Archetypes have been around forever. They're cross-cultural. They don't change, except that they grow when we grow with them. So, we co-create archetypal structures. And archetypes are sort of much more general. So we talk about the mother, we talk about the daughter archetype, we talk about the queen archetype. There are lots of these feminine archetypes that we talk about. But I feel like to climb into them, we need to move into the story, the narrative, wisdom teachings that are found in mythology. And the particular archetypal stories that I like to use are based on the Greek pantheon. Mm-hmm. And I use the Greek pantheon because I feel like they've been patriarchalized similarly to the way we have. So I find that a lot of the Eastern archetypes are still too intact for us to get the wisdom teachings from. I feel like Roman archetypes are over patriarchalized and so don't have, the more pure wisdom teachings. So I like the Greeks. And I do go back to the Babylonian as well a little bit. And I love the stories from Europe because they're Western. So I like to blend those two aspects, just, the sort of Western for the Western women and patriarchalized in a similar way. So I've sort of like got a bit of a thing. I've got my recipe, right?
Your special secret recipe.
Right. I'm sort of like a bit of a paleontologist putting together these old stories.
The alchemist.
Yes. And it is changing a bit because I've been doing this a long time and I've noticed some really significant changes over the years. And one of the changes I've noticed is, there was the classic daughter-mother crone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a kind of fairly typical archetypal template for women. But what I've noticed increasingly is that, the whole story of mother, of course, is just huge now. And it isn't, limited to biological mothering at all. And then the part between mother and crone has stretched right out. So we've got a bunch of archetypes inside of that now because we're evolving and we're liberating.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of different aspects to us. And now I'm using archetypes in the feminine, which are leaning strongly in their masculine, which is interesting. I'm looking at Athena and Artemis and Hera as feminine archetypes that are menopausal,
mm-hmm.
and looking at how they have been quite patriarchalized and what they've done with their yang, and they've all done different things. But, these were not archetypes that we explored so much 40, 50 years ago, but they're extremely relevant now. So it's an ongoing dynamic exploration, and we're looking now at more gender fluid archetypes. So things are moving, but it is a complex thing. And I guess we don't grow up in feminine community where we are, we don't have the advantage of having quite a few different women to see as a sort of variety from which to learn about all the aspects and facets of a full feminine engagement. And so we sort of almost have to lean into being in circles with other women and hearing stories and seeing aspects of them that are lesser known. And we teach each other and we grow each other in that way. And using the wisdom teachings of old, because there were a lot of goddesses in that
mm-hmm.
pantheon, and they all represented different aspects to the feminine. And when I grew up, it was lucky if you saw one or two women that you admired, right?
Yes,
so
I can resonate with that.
Right. And so, we need to look at the shadow and the light of each archetypal structure. And then, here I think is a really important aspect, to make sure that the ego doesn't over-identify with a particular aspect. Some of us fall into the mother archetype and then get devastated when the children leave. Or we fall into Athena, the patriarchal daughter,
mm-hmm.
and get devastated when we lose our job. Or we fall into Aphrodite, and get devastated as we age. So we take on these archetypal structures as identities because the ego always wants to put the possessive tense onto everything. It's like, no, I'm Aphrodite. No, you're not. You're not Demeter. You're much bigger. You are all of these. So what we do is we learn how to align with Aphrodite or love, or we learn how to align with Athena and strength, or Demeter and, nurture, but we don't then identify with them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly learning, growing, and moving the ego out of the field simultaneously.
Which I find it's very, very powerful. And I love how you're describing it, especially this way to look at the mind and the heart, right? So when we talk about the spirituality, and it is probably true, at least in a traditional mystical schools, it just historically it happened this way. Then there was this over-identification with the mind, and there was less focus on the heart, simply because historically there were more men who had this luxury to pursue this path women could not do this, right? We had to look after children and household and elderly parents and do all kind of other things. So there was not much luxury for someone who was born in a female body to do this. So of course, because majority of practitioners were men, so then they created practices for men. It's very logical, very normal. Yes. And so now I just would like a little bit also go deep in that heart space. Right? So when we talk about them, and you mentioned emotions, and you mentioned that it's about integrating it, right? It's not about bypassing it. It's about integrating it. So now for people who are listening, whether they are men or women, it doesn't matter, because we talk about the feminine aspect here, which is present in every human being. But let's say if a person identifies with very open heart, which, interesting enough, many people who are on a spiritual path do. That's why they even develop this word like an empath, for example, right? An extra sensitive person who just feels everything everyone else is feeling. And what do we do? What do we do with our emotions in a spiritual context?
Yes. And I mean, I think that one of the things that's important for us to do is to acknowledge that some of these emotions are strategic, you know, and the way that we use them is strategic. And basically, human beings want to feel safe and they want to feel loved. You know, and they want to know that where they are is the right environment. So it's like, where am I, who am I, and who are you? And once we can relax that need, then we can start to move up Maslow's hierarchy and start to engage spiritually. But to ignore that, I think, is to ignore it at our peril, because we are human and we are embodied. And we want to live fully in this luscious body that we have. And we're not here to remove any aspect of ourselves. We're here to welcome it and encompass it. And so we need to be able to make distinctions around, if I'm an empath, what is it that has me not feel that I have the right to maybe say no, to maybe not be as porous in my boundaries? Am I compensating for something? Is this a habit? Is there some part of me that collapses in the face of my own worth? These are really important questions, because I believe that everything we need, we have, but there are veils. And we need to understand the veils to know which veils need to be healed. And I don't believe we can just remove the veils. I think if we try to remove the veils or pretend they're not there, then we're actually cutting off a part of ourselves, not integrating. So each veil softens with the right kind of attention. And it's like having a child that comes up, not always in the most convenient time, for support. And if we push that away, the child learns to not come into the space. So we learn that attachment isn't okay. But if the child comes into the space and we give it enough, just enough support, their need relaxes, and then they learn that they don't have to detach, but they don't have to over-attach. And I think that's the secret of non-attachment. It's not pushing anything away, but it's just giving it the right kind of attention. Now, that is a real art. That's an art form.
I was just going to say, yes, that takes a mastery to do that with children and ourselves, right?
It does. It really does. It does. Because, you know, I've got an intrusive child like most people, and to give it the right kind of attention at the right time is an art form. But, sometimes all I've got the time to do is give it some breath and let it relax, and I'll attend to it later. But I need to get back there, and I need to understand what part of me is coming up for healing. This part isn't coming up to be a nuisance. This part is coming up to be healed. This part is coming up to complete some kind of parenting that was not available. And when that parenting is completed, and I'm the only person that can do that now, right? That need relaxes. Mm-hmm. So it's an ongoing journey of having something in me arise, me giving it the right kind of attention, letting it relax so that it heals that wound, so that, that doesn't arise in the same way. If I indulge it, if I indulge every emotion I have, I'm carving a neural pathway, so that every time every button that I have gets pushed, I immediately go into reactivity. If I start to pattern interrupt that pathway, then that's one thing I can do. And I think that a lot of, this just drop it is a pattern interrupt, right?
Yes.
So that pathway might atrophy, but I can do better. What I can do is, in that gentle welcoming and giving enough attention and relaxing, I'm bringing compassion in. So not only am I atrophying the old pathway where I get triggered and reactive, but I'm building a new pathway to getting compassion, because compassion starts at home, right? Mm-hmm. So up rises the reactivity. I offer it breath, or I offer it insight, or I offer it whatever I need to offer it. It starts to relax, and I'm filled with compassion for it, and then my neural pathway to compassion is strengthened.
And then you drop it.
Well, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same pull anymore.
Yeah.
Energetically, it starts to relax. It's like the child that has faith that you'll get back to it later and isn't as interfering. It starts to mature, and that child hopefully grows up and integrates into the adult that I need to be. And I can still practice my attachment in an appropriate way without severing, and just dropping.
Mm-hmm. You use two really important words, detachment and non-attachment, right? So let's just spend just a moment to clarify this also for people, because it often gets confused.
Yes.
People confuse the two, and they don't know, they think that they are non-attached, but they're actually detached, right? Yeah. So let's just dive a little bit deeper. What is the difference between it, and how does it influence our life and relationship with people around us, whether we are one or the other?
Okay. Well, I think this notion of non-attachment is beautiful, and it's a high spiritual practice for sure. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit like that quote from Leonard Cohen, and that we want to feel ourselves as oceanic and not invest in every drama in our life, right? Mm-hmm. So we need a certain amount of non-attachment. But when we are oceanic, we still acknowledge that, here's a wave, here's a dip, here's a crest. And we have to be consciously viewing that with compassion. We can't pretend that that doesn't exist, right? And that we are not engaged in a human world, because that separates us. And what we're wanting is no separation. We really want to feel part of the whole. We want to be at one. We want to dissolve into everything, right? In a sort of non-being way. I mean, we have to be everything before we can go even beyond being, right? Mm-hmm. So our way to be everything is to allow everything. But what do we allow that with? We allow that with a certain amount of attachment, a certain amount of acknowledgement. We welcome it, we greet it. Rumi talks about the stranger, as the guest. So, whatever part of us is peculiar and strange and reactive, we welcome it in, We don't identify with it. So there's always that beautiful blend of a certain amount of welcoming, but non-attaching.
Mm-hmm.
But when we detach, it's like we just push it right out of the field as though it doesn't exist. We're not going there. It's in the too hard basket. We're not going to indulge it, so we're going to ignore it. And then it's very difficult to get into any kind of human relationship. It's very difficult to actually invest our heart fully in anything, because everything is, has got waves. I mean, the whole dynamism of the earth is storms and wind and famine and, everything is in this dynamic unfolding, and we're part of that. And to detach from that and want to be still and separate is exactly the opposite of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And we really need to show up. It's about showing up and being non-attached. It's not about detaching and just folding into lotus in our saffron and just omming, and then we're just kind of cold the rest of the time, It's about active engagement.
With the world and society around it.
That's where we are. That's the karma, is that we are here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I also see this. I think we have to mention this because it's important. There is quite a bit of a difference, right? For people who are like us, who are born in the society, and we are Western born kind of type of people, right? So we have a certain social upbringing around it. And there is a very small percentage of people who are born in a kind of deeply spiritual path from the very beginning, right?
Yes.
So their path is a little bit kind of, it's completely formed in different directions, and those are the people who end up going to forests and mountains and meditating in caves. Yes. And it is like an entirely different conversation for someone like that to go and spend 30 years in a meditation in a cave. Is actually a deeply compassionate and giving experience for the society, because even by now it's confirmed the scientific point of view in quantum physics, they are changing the energy for all of us on the collective level, right? Mm-hmm. However, people like us who are in this society and born in this society, we need to face the reality, and also not be in denial about our roots and our past and our present and our family, because that's the other thing that I also see often with especially Western people who try to go on a spiritual path, that they pretend that whatever happened to them never happened. Like, I never had mother and father. I never had a family, right? I'm just going to check myself in the ashram, and whatever was before that never existed.
That's right.
And I think it's a really dangerous thing to do.
I agree with you. I mean, I think that our path is different. And we have different obstacles, and ultimately we want to all get to the same place, but our road is, has different vegetation, and we need different tools. I also think that we don't want to languish in our past. We don't want to keep tearing off the scar tissue. So we might even say that part of the shadow also of psychotherapy, since we're talking about the shadow of things, is that maybe we have spent too long looking at the inner child. I know that there are books written about the tyranny of the inner child, and there is a place where we say, my parents are not going to be any different to the way they were. My experiences are not going to shift. I need to, at some point, acknowledge that is my Achilles heel, and I will care for that. I will not ignore it. But I'm building something else as well to hold it. So I'm building a new holding environment in which I can absolutely hold my spiritual practice, my psychological issues, all of it's welcome. But to indulge neither the cutting off nor the sort of endless dropping back into somewhere. Maybe that's a good middle road for us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I'm going to play a little bit of a devil advocate here just for a few minutes, because I know that you're a therapist, right? I mean, you're practicing, or even psychotherapy, you're practicing this. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I mean, clearly you're deeply spiritual. You understand very well the context and the whole journey itself. And that's exactly what you said. Like in our society, we have been studying therapy and psychotherapy for a very long time. Yes. So there are many scientists who really, went and trying to understand human mind and how human mind functions. And there are tons of books written and tools developed how to deal with inner child and inner shadow and all kind of other things. Yep. And that's actually exactly my question. How do we know we're not overindulging ourselves in all of that? Maybe the industry is overdeveloped. I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too much, because then it also becomes a business eventually, right? I mean, I understand. I mean, if we're just being very real, honest, and practical about it. I mean, of course, people go and they get a therapy or psychotherapy degree. It becomes their profession. I mean, what do? It also becomes an identity that I am a psychotherapist, and then an entire life is built around it. You cannot just drop it, because it also becomes your source of income eventually. And then we kind of start breeding more and more of that. And then it's a little bit like, the supply creates the demand, right? So because there are just so much of people who tell you they can fix your mind, yes. People go, well, maybe something is wrong with my mind. Maybe I have to go and check it. Do you see what I mean here?
Oh, I totally understand what you're saying. I think that, it's like everything, and we are evolving and we're learning. And I think what's starting to happen, and it's been happening a long time, for example, in the rooms, with 12-step, they acknowledge that at some point you've got to hand it over. You've got to actually believe in some power greater than yourself. And I think that the same thing is happening with psychotherapy, because I think a lot of my colleagues would say that they are in a psycho-spiritual work. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that a good spiritual path incorporates some psychology, mm-hmm. and I think a good psychological path incorporates spirituality, and I think it's masterful or mistressful, or I don't know how to say this in a non-gendered way, but it's an art to be able to know when to segue into what. And I think, sometimes we try and do it a little bit simultaneously. So if we're breaking down the ego, we're building up a bigger self, mm-hmm. And so that you don't have to feel the devastating deprivation of absolutely nothing without having a self that is beyond ego being built, that you can start to lean into, that you don't then over-identify with and not do your psychological work, but your psychological work is also kind of going to be limited if you don't have this spiritual ground. So I feel like the future is a combination of both, and I think it's a more comprehensive path, particularly for us in the West.
Mm-hmm. So we could see that there will be like a new profession officially evolving, the psycho-spiritual guide, right? Or something like this?
I think so, because I maybe some people will specialize in one. Maybe you'll have to go to two practitioners that are kind of corresponding. It's quite a big thing, isn't it, to get somebody that is psychologically very grounded and spiritually awake.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's what's being asked of us as we evolve, and that's exciting. I think that's exciting, both. Again, welcome it all,
Yes, I love it. Okay, so I'm just looking also at the time, and I think we are coming soon to an hour of the conversation here. You have been on this journey for a long time, right? Pretty much your entire life, probably, trying also to figure out just things for yourself. So, and then of course, as a result, guiding other people. So if I would ask you, what advice would you give maybe even to yourself when 20, 30 years ago, right? When you felt that you don't really know much. And that would be relevant, I think, for many people who are waking up to this at the moment.
I think I wish I had have learned the Enneagram earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Enneagram is a beautiful psycho-spiritual system. And I think what that gave me and what I wish I had have learned earlier was what would have been my identities, which I think I was massaging and crafting for way too long. So I kind of wish I had have done that. I wish I would have worked that out with someone very benevolent, because working out identities can be really brutal. And yeah, I guess I wish I had have found the kind of therapist that you and I are talking about.
Yes, 30 years ago, right? The psycho-spiritual somebody.
Yes. Like a perfect mummy therapist that had both aspects really well sorted. That would have been really nice.
Wow.
That would have been really nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's many people can relate. I definitely can relate to that. So I feel that many women especially would want to have this ideal mom archetype that definitely knows the truth. Not she thinks she knows, and that's why she imposes her own stuff on you, but actually who knows. And you can trust
her work.
Exactly. And you can trust in her benevolence, right? And in guiding her own children. And I also find it's highly inspirational because for women, right, who there are many women with the families and children all over the world, and it's an entirely different conversation of itself, to be a mom and to guide your children in this way. But that's why I think we also started our conversation today with talking about feminine and masculine aspect of the spiritual journey. And in my humble understanding, just because women still traditionally become the center of the family structure when there is a woman in the family structure, right? And women who still hold communities and societies together just because of the nature of the feminine energy and heart and mind, the way and interconnectivity, right? How it wants to connect and dissolve what you said into everything around it.
Yes.
So that's why it's so important that we as women do our inner work.
Yes.
Because it's not only about us, it's also about our children and, everyone who is around us. And so that's why it's so important that an empowered woman who really owns all her shadows and understands it, and who fully integrated your heart, speaking your words, which I love the expression. So, and then also this balance with the inner masculine who has this equanimity in your mind, right? Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. When you're the ocean and you're not unsettled by the waves of it. So that's, wow. That's
what a combination.
What a combination, yes. So please, all women who are listening to it right now, do the best you can.
I can feel 10,000 women just falling over with exhaustion, but actually,
I know, exactly.
It's not another job.
No.
It's getting stuff that you don't need out of the way. Everything you have is there. It's veiled. It's just veiled. And your own flavor will come through. You don't have to be like anybody else. Just allow yourself to be fully yourself. That's your birthright, and your flavor will be different. But the veils, get some support with that, because you don't need to carry those burdensome things. And then just melt into receptivity. It's those wonderful moments where we're laughing with a friend and we forget who's laughing. That's spiritual enlightenment.
Yes, that's dissolution in the moment.
Ego is out of the way. We're just totally in the moment. We're available. Everything's welcome, and we're free. So it doesn't have to be this somber, task-driven, disciplined, difficult. It's just letting that small self know that it's cared for and dissolve away so that you can just meet each moment with an active engagement and an open heart and a stiller mind. Sounds easy, doesn't it?
On this wonderful note, how easy it sounds and totally doable, everyone.
Yes.
We are coming to the end of our interview. So thank you, Jutka. That was really powerful and very encompassing, right? So it was like including everything around us. It was truly, truly beautiful. I definitely learned a lot. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
That was a deep dive into the essence of the feminine and how it shows up in the world of spirituality and mysticism. Did you enjoy the interview? Feel free to share this episode with friends, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on social media. Stay wild and be humble. До встречи!